to oil and gas infrastructure. Bloomberg's Irv Chapman has more from Washington.
The industry can handle what's coming, Energy Secretary Dan Brouillette said in a Bloomberg interview, and he has a team keeping tabs on the situation.
We are very prepared for this hurricane. Huge refineries down there, important oil and gas infrastructure are down there. We're working closely with the industry. We feel that the industry is very well prepared for this type of storm.
Brouillette said oil can be taken from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve if supplies run short. In Washington, Irv Chapman, Bloomberg Radio.
And the head of the FDA is walking back his claim on the ability of an experimental therapy to provide a dramatic benefit to COVID-19 patients. And now Dr. Stephen Hahn is saying the data show a relative risk reduction, not an absolute risk reduction. And Senator Elizabeth Warren is seeking information on the FDA and the administration authorizing convalescent plasma for emergency use. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Doug Krisner. This is Bloomberg.
Thanks, Doug. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Masser, you know, there are these events that sort of capture a moment, you know, a moment in time that people look back on and they have an outsized influence. One that I always go back to, much to his chagrin, Steve Schwarzman's birthday party in 2007. You know, it was like this epic, big, massive party at sort of the height of the LBO boom. He rented out the Park Avenue Armory. Rod Stewart performed. And, like, despite Steve's best efforts, it has become this, like, symbol of Wall Street.
It's like Bonfire of the Vanities, right? Like,
exactly. The pandemic and its uneven response and its inequalities in many ways, the sort of fiddling while Rome burns element to it, may come down to an event called Safe and Sound. We know that it happened in July in the Hamptons. David Solomon, the CEO of Goldman Sachs, he was spinning records. It's been investigated because they were flouting all sorts of rules. And here comes a story by Amanda Gordon that says, hey, it was a charity event. Guess how much they gave to charity?
$152,000. And what's crazy is it was $25,000 or up to $25,000 to attend this outdoor concert. And as you said, and as Amanda writes so eloquently, as she always does when she's covering these events, you know, this Safe and Sound has gone down as the most tone-deaf musical moment of the Hamptons summer of COVID. State health officials have launched an investigation after Governor Cuomo, you know, really just kind of kicked into the organizers, just blew them apart, and everybody who was there about, like, this is not what you're supposed to be doing.
Right. And I think it is offensive to some who are used to, you know, millions being raised, that $152,000 is the take here for charity. So that, in many ways, adds insult to injury. I don't think this is the last we've heard of this story, but a great bit of reporting, and I love that line that you just said from Amanda Gordon. This is Bloomberg.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. 43 minutes to go ahead of the closing bell. We've got stocks trading at session highs now, with the S&P up 10, a gain of 0.3%. NASDAQ up 79, higher by 0.7% for both the S&P and NASDAQ. Those are records. The Dow is down 84, lower by 0.3%. 10-year yield 0.68%. Gold is down 0.1%, $19.27 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.7%, $43.36 a barrel. After the bell, we hear from Salesforce. Shares up now by 3.9%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It is indeed. Charlie, thank you so much. So safe to say it was the necklace seen around the world. Former First Lady Michelle Obama, in her speech at the DNC last week, wearing a custom-made necklace. It spelled out VOTE, vote. And in this week's edition of Bloomberg Business Week's Small Business Survival Guide, we take a look at the designer and small business owner behind it all. She is jewelry designer Shari Cuthbert, and she joins us on the phone from Miami, along with our own Bloomberg News editor, Dimitra Kasanides, on the phone in New Jersey. Dimitra, I got to say, when Jason and I are kind of reading in, there are certain rabbit holes that we fall into, and this was one for me because I was just checking out Shari's website for a long time before our show. Anyway, set the scene for us and why you wanted to reach out to her.
Well, I mean, I think I discovered it the way a lot of other people did. I was watching the convention. I heard Michelle Obama's speech. I myself didn't notice the necklace, but I think within less than 24 hours later, two friends on Facebook had posted that they ordered the necklace. And I was like, wow, okay. I wonder what, who the lucky business person is behind this business that, got this great exposure, given Michelle wearing it. And so I just poked around and saw, where people were ordering it from. Then I did go down the rabbit hole of looking at all the great jewelry designs, and I was like, oh, I want that and that and that and that.
Well, let's bring in Shari, because I did the same thing. And Jason, you're going to have to check this out for your wife, because I think Jen would love this as well. Shari, just what was, first of all, the initial reach out to you to do something for Michelle Obama?
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Her stylist, Meredith Coop, reached out to us via email. We had no idea it wasn't anything arranged. She just kindly wanted to find out how quickly we could get a necklace made. And once we confirmed who it was for, obviously we got it done immediately. And that was it. I mean, we got it out that day, and we didn't know what was going to happen next. We just knew that she had it.
And so tell us about, because as I understand it, your mom called you, right?
Yes. A little clip of Mrs. Obama's speech aired earlier on CNN, and my mom had somehow seen it and zoomed all the way in. I didn't even know what I was looking at when she sent it. She was just so excited. And then I was like, Mom, what is that? And she was like, she's wearing your necklace. So I went online and I found the clip of the speech, and it was just an incredible moment, just knowing that she was wearing it with a piece of ore is what an honor. But we didn't know, didn't realize she was going to wear it for the speech itself during the DNC.
So how prepared or not were you for what happened next?
Not prepared.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody is prepared for that. Even if we had planned ahead, knowing that she might have worn the necklace, I don't think we could have anticipated the reaction that happened. I didn't think it would convert to sales. That wasn't something I'd ever dreamed of. So we just took it. We got on the phone that night. Myself and my director of operations, Shivali, got on the phone. We just started planning, and we've hired, I think, 6 people since then. So we're just doing as much as we can.
So Dimitra, come on in. I'm wondering if you have a question while we're on air for Shari.
Yeah, I mean, what we've chatted about a little bit was just how you then, I mean, they hired 6 people. That was one of my questions, because it was like, how do you deal with this onslaught? But, is there a way to just, it was a tough year. Did it completely turn things around for the business in terms of how this year was going? Because, this is a business that was an e-commerce business, but they were very hands-on. They would all work together, so they did have to shut down. things were challenging, and suddenly this happens, and can a year that's maybe not going to be a great year, or maybe even be a really bad year, I don't really know, but can it, what happened? Did it suddenly dawn on you that, like, okay, there's all this stuff, but also we're going to be okay as a business? Like, was there that realization?
100%. In the very beginning, when everything started to shut down, we were a little worried about how we were going to operate and how we were going to continue. I mean, for me, the most part was I have 5 employees had 5 employees at the time, and just being able to provide for them was my first concern. About a couple of weeks into everything, the Black Lives Matter movement happened, and as a Black-owned business, we got a lot of attention, which we were really grateful. We never really ever put out, that I'm a Black founder, so that was a lot of amazing attention. That definitely helped during that time. We were definitely starting to turn things around, and then Mrs. Obama wore the necklace, and 100%, we have the fact that we can now hire so many more people and actually start to project for the rest of the year what could potentially happen is amazing. I can't even, this is a one in a lifetime opportunity. So
Yeah.
we're grateful, and so excited for all of the opportunities, and even just this call. I mean, this is amazing for us.
All right, I do have to ask you before we let you go, Shari, about the underlying message in all this, because your necklace came with a message. It's not partisan. It is nonpartisan in many ways, but it's something we talk about all the time, is important to us, and I know it's important to you, and that's vote.
100%. It's like you said, we're nonpartisan. All we want people to do is show up and vote. It's not even about voting for one president or one potential president or the other. It's about what's happening on a local level, who your representatives are, and people miss that sometimes. I think it's really important for people to know what's happening in their own cities and how these representatives affect us. So they need to go out and vote, make your voice heard. We have that opportunity. Why not take advantage of it?
All right, so Jason ended with a deep question. I'm going to ask with a shallow question. Was it gold? Was it small or large letters? And was it 16 or an 18-inch chain? Just quickly.
It's an 18-inch chain, 14-karat yellow gold, large letters.
Okay. I needed to know. It's. I have to say, I'm in love with her website. I'm in love, and I'm in love with what she did, and that we had this conversation, because it is ultimately about getting out to vote. I'm just going to say that, Jason.
It is. You're right. You're right. Our thanks to Shari Cuthbert, owner of Buy Shari, on the phone with us, along with Dimitra Castanese, editor of Bloomberg Businessweek. Check out that story and many others on the Small Business Survival Guide at businessweek.com. It's Bloomberg.
To Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 99.1. To Boston, Bloomberg 106.1. To San Francisco, Bloomberg 960. To the country, Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
Coming up, it is that time, the chart of the day, the song of the day. We got a preview earlier from Dave Wilson. It's about Apple and the Gap.
I'm sorry.
Maybe it'll be the Gap.
I'm busy
band.
with Baishari.
Buying some jewelry.
I love it when someone like that gets
Can you get one that
recognition.
says chart of the day or just chart?
Actually, you could. In
See?
yellow gold, white gold, and
I
with
know.
diamonds.
I know. No, listen, you're a walking catalog at this point. All right, we're going to get the chart and song of the day coming up. But first, let's get back to Charlie Pellet. Hey, Charlie.
Well, hello there. Apple and the Gap sounds like an Elton John song. Stay tuned for that. We've got J. Crew winning court approval of a plan that will keep it alive by shedding debt and handing control of the business to lenders. Gap shares, meanwhile, pushing higher, getting an upgrade at Citi, which cited its view that the retailer's Athleta brand may have value that isn't recognized by the market. Gap shares, they're up now by just about 10%. One other retail note, beginning today, Facebook adding a new shopping section to its main app, all part of a broader push to capitalize on the increase in online shopping. The new section, by the way, called Facebook Shop, shares up by 3.7%. The U.S. and China reaffirmed their commitment to the Phase 1 trade deal in a biennial review, demonstrating a willingness to cooperate even as tensions rise over issues ranging from data security to democracy in Hong Kong. Carla Freeman is Johns Hopkins Executive Director of the Foreign Policy Institute and Associate Research Professor of China Studies. She was interviewed this morning on Bloomberg Television and Radio.
I think there are diverse opinions in the Trump, even within the Trump administration, in how to handle China. I think, frankly, Trump seems more willing to work with China in many arenas than other members of his White House.
The Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health is supported by Michael R. Bloomberg, founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies. Looking at a mixed day here, but we've got the S&P, NASDAQ, best level of the day, 27 minutes to go ahead of the close. S&P up 11 right now. That's a gain of 0.3%. NASDAQ up 81, up 0.7. The Dow narrowing its loss now to 67 points, down 0.2%. 10-year down 10/30 seconds with a yield of 0.68%. Gold down 0.1%. 19.26 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.6%, 43.32 a barrel. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thanks so much. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week right here on Bloomberg Radio.
Baby, you can drive my car. Yes, I'm gonna be a star.
See, now this is another case that if Alex Steele was here and she did not get it, I would be like,
Yeah, I know. But it wasn't in a Broadway musical.
okay, yeah, I can't say.
So I want to understand how how the Beatles connect and that tune connect with Apple and the Gap.
Well, the gap, Jason, is the gap with analyst estimates when it comes to the share price. So let's be specific there. Well, the headline of the chart says Apple sticker shock. And that got me thinking about cars. Drive My Car kind of flowed from that. And if you think about it, it's about, some would-be star and a fan. Apple's got a lot of fans among analysts. So, you carry it out and it all kind of works. And what this has to do with is just, how strong the stock has been as the company has gone above $2 trillion in market value, becoming the first company ever to do that. You look at where Apple closed yesterday relative to the average estimate of the analysts that we survey here at Bloomberg. And bear in mind, generally, they're predicting where a stock is going to be 12 months out. Apple's close yesterday was 17% higher than the average estimate. And there's never been a gap that wide in favor of Apple since we first started compiling these target price averages back in 2011. So, and it really kind of jumped out at me yesterday because, you saw Wedbush raise its forecast, its target price, to $515. And during the day yesterday, Apple got above $515. That was the second highest estimate. The highest, $520 from Morgan Stanley, and that had just been raised over the weekend. So it just goes to show you, Apple, the way it's gone up, and the analysts just have chosen for whatever reason not to keep up. It's something you don't see very often, and you certainly haven't seen it historically with the iPhone makers. So it jumped out, hence the chart. And if you haven't seen it, folks, send me an email. I'll get it to you along with the explanation that goes with it and everything I do going forward. The address, got your pens ready? dwilson@bloomberg.net. That's dwilson@bloomberg.net.
All right, Mr. Wilson, thank you so much. Really interesting to understand. We're always looking for those inconsistencies, as it were. And man, $2 trillion, it just is incredible.
And if you order now, you get a buy Shari necklace that says Chart of the Day.
There you
could do. That's what's really cool.
Chart, or just
Chart,
Dave,
or just Chart, or just Dave, or just the one Dave,
or COTD. See what I did there?
It sounds like COPD. That gets a little weird.
COTD, like VOTE on
Yes.
Michelle Obama's necklace.
Yes,
exactly.
Were you listening to? Did you listen to us?
Are
Are you just with it?
I'm just with it.
Yeah.
Okay.
We
That's
had
all.
we had the designer of
She's
that
so
necklace
cool.
on just a few minutes
Very
ago, Dave.
cool. Yeah, I figured as much.
Yeah, no, she was pretty incredible, and she told us the story. Folks who are tuning in now, because so many people do tune in for Dave's Chart of the Day, seriously, you can go back and listen to our podcast later, because she talked about the moment, Dave, where basically her mom saw a snippet that they were playing, like a preview of the speech on CNN, and took a blurry cell phone shot and sent it to her daughter, to Sherry. And Sherry's like, "What is this? I don't know what this is." And her mom was like, "She's wearing your necklace." Anyway,
Your life is about to change.
yes, exactly. She's had to hire 6 new people to
great.
keep up with demand. So it's pretty amazing.
I just tweeted out the podcast link so that people can later on check into it.
Check that out.
But you
And
could
buy
do a
necklace.
chart of the day.
Yeah.
The one Dave, or Dave, you can get one for your wife.
Yeah, exactly. There you go.
I
Is
could
she
get one
like-
for you, Carol, but that's a whole nother story.
No, you can't do that.
Carol's already bought herself 3.
No,
Okay.
but I want to.
That's all right.
But I
Yeah.
want to. It's totally.
Exactly.
I'm like
Exactly.
obsessed.
I think we know what everyone on Carol's Christmas list is getting this year. So Buy Sherry
They're
needs to be
so cool.
prepared. All right, Dave Wilson, we'll talk to you in just a few minutes right after the close of trading for your SOTD, the stock of the day. That's another companion necklaces. No?
Earrings. Who knows?
Oh,
Yeah.
see, I don't know. Like I have to check if there's.
You really have gone down this rabbit hole,
Yeah.
Carol.
Yeah,
feel
I
like
think
I've lost
everything
you.
on our show.
You know, we
I'm
have
good.
about
Listen,
2.5
when
more hours to do
Dave
this
can
show.
be part of this, I am just in heaven.
Yeah.
Can I just
exactly.
say?
Yeah,
I mean, Dave
yeah,
is
I
on
love it.
board Jason Kelly with this.
I'm 100% on board. I'm just like trying to sort of pull you
COTD.
back.
I know. Carol, we have 2.5 hours of show.
We have a lot more necklaces to talk about. All right, let's get to Doug Krisner now. He's got World National Headlines. Hey, Doug.
Hey, Jason. Hurricane Laura is poised to become a Category 3 storm when it comes ashore along the Texas-Louisiana coastline. This is threatening to inflict as much as $12 billion in damage. More than 385,000 residents in Texas have been told to flee, and now a new study finds tens of thousands more people could be infected by the coronavirus, depending on how this emergency is handled. Meantime, the Centers for Disease Control has issued a new health warning related to the coronavirus. Bloomberg's Nathan Hager tells us it's one you might not expect.
This guidance is aimed at retail and service workers who could face physical harm from customers who refuse to wear face coverings. The new page on the CDC website outlines a series of actions companies could take, from installing panic buttons for their workers to having staff enforce mask wearing in pairs. Above all, the agency that usually focuses on disease prevention says workers should not put themselves in the direct line of danger. Nathan Hager, Bloomberg Radio.
President Trump's plan to eliminate payroll taxes would deplete the Social Security Retirement Trust Fund by 2023. The Social Security Administration also says its disability insurance fund would be depleted by the middle of next year. Now, The Hill is reporting, absent other sources of revenue, these programs would stop paying out benefits when those funds run out of money. And First Lady Melania Trump will make the case for her husband's re-election tonight at the second night of the Republican National Convention. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo speaking from Jerusalem. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take. I'm Doug Krisner in New York. This is Bloomberg.
Doug, thank you so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Jason Kelly, Carol Masser here with you. This is a story that's a little bit of a downer, I have to say.
A little bit.
And not potentially wrong. Sarah Ponzak talking about this. You brought this up earlier, Carol, when we were putting together the show, so I'm glad we're talking about it. The stock market warns workers that they're the problem for business. This quote really stopped me in my tracks. This phrase, quote, a bear market for humans.
Oh my God, right. Well, so they've been trying to figure out, and she has, and our equity team, like, what's the common denominator, right? We see tech surging, bank stocks falling, growth is rising, value drops, big companies thriving, small ones are struggling. And so she writes about, we're trying to figure out this organizing principle, and someone has come up with kind of cracking the code here. The problem with companies is people. And Vincent Deliard, he's the director of global macro strategy at StoneX Group. It's a brokerage. He says, quote, I would summarize 2020 as the bear market for humans. Like many things, COVID is just accelerating social transformation, concentration of wealth in a few hands, massive inequalities, competition issues, and all of that. But if you think about what's going on, I think this is huge. I think there will be more transformations, more acceleration in terms of automation to get people out of the equation, because we see how that's a problem in an environment like that. And I also think companies, whenever we go through these crises, they rethink, okay, what do we really need? What really contributes to the business and the bottom line?
Well, and one of the things
usually
that Sarah does with her story, which I think is really interesting, we talked about this earlier with Rhea Thomas from Wilmington Trust, this whole notion, which is true, the stock market is in the economy, but as Sarah points out, the market actually is a reflection of the economy, and specifically a wager on which companies will flourish in the future. And we've seen people-light tech companies really flourishing here. And, if you're a human, as we are, it's a little bit troubling.
If you're FANG stock, FANG company, you're doing okay.
Yeah.
Because that's where we're seeing the moves up, certainly, in the equity market. This is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. 13 minutes to go ahead of the closing bell. Stocks are at records. S&P climbing for a third day. Investors counting on the Fed to stay accommodative as the economy recovers from the coronavirus pandemic. S&P up 12 now. That is a gain of 0.4%, just about session highs. The Dow is down 72, down by 0.3%. Another record on NASDAQ, up 83 points, higher by 0.7%. 10-year down 9/30 seconds, yield 0.68%. Gold lower, little change, down 42 cents the ounce now at 19.28. And West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.7%, 43.33 a barrel. Recapping, equities mixed, S&P at a record up 11, up 0.3%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
I'm driving in my car. I turn on the radio.
How about you let me drive?
Oh, no.
Who's gonna drive you home?
Honey, please, I'll do the driving.
Drive on.
Excuse me, I want to drive.
Just drive, baby.
It's the question that drives us.
This is the drive to the close
That funky music will drive us till the dawn.
on Bloomberg Radio.
It is time for the drive to the close. Back with us is Aaron Kennan, co-founder, chief executive officer of Clear Harbor Asset Management, looking after about $800 million. He joins us on the phone from Stamford, Connecticut, sort of on the other side of Westchester County from where I am, the east side. I'm on the west side. Aaron, really nice to have you back with us. What's your world like right now? How are things going?
Well, thanks for having me back, Jason and Carol. What is my world like? Well, we moved our headquarters from Manhattan to Stamford, Connecticut. So this is the first time I'm speaking with you from Connecticut. So that's big news from a Clear Harbor perspective. But we're still doing the same thing, and that is working very closely with our clients, which tend to be families and endowments, smaller endowments, focused on wading through this crisis, but also wading through their own personal financial lives. As much as the market is volatile, the beat goes on for everyone. And we have clients that we were on the phone with this week that were dealing with sending a loved one to assisted living or planning for college or should they build that or buy that house in the country. People who live, for example, in the city are pondering what life is like and going back to school and sending their kids back to school and should they consider private school. And so there's that all is happening in my world right now. And, of course, focusing on markets and what's happening on with the Fed and in the overall economy and asset allocation. So lots of variables happening.
Yeah. So I do want to talk about the markets, but if you don't mind, I'd love to ask you a little bit more about that move from Manhattan to Stamford. Tell us a little bit about the decision there and how much of this was ultimately pandemic driven.
Right, yeah. So I co-founded the company 11 years ago. We were right in Midtown Manhattan, right at Grand Central Station. Loved it. I do live in Connecticut, but I actually did enjoy the commute. But I have to say, when polling the entire membership of the firm about the idea of using a subway or taking Metro North or the PATH train or the Long Island Railroad, or just walking through Grand Central, there weren't too many hands that were raised. And so I looked at the writing on the wall there and really wanted to get the band back together and thought this would be the quickest and most expeditious and efficient way to do it. And so we are here. Not everyone is here every day, but there are more people here than we would otherwise have in New York. And I think that's really important from a collaboration perspective.
Yeah, I wonder too, as you talk to, and we'll get into kind of the investment outlook, but we're intrigued by this because we do feel like, Aaron, we're talking, Jason and I, to more and more business owners like yourself who've had offices in New York and hearing about people who are kind of rolling it up and moving outside the city or just doing it virtually longer term. What are you hearing from other folks, colleagues, peers that you talk to in the financial community and elsewhere?
Well, yeah, I think, I was just chatting with someone this morning. They're told they're not going back until July of 2021 at the earliest. So, sort of make your plans as you will. as you wish. And there are other large financial institutions that are, rolling back plans or rolling out plans, but even at a slower pace than they were considering a month or two ago. I will say I love New York City. I think it's the greatest city in the world. I've lived in London. I've lived in Tokyo. I've lived in Hong Kong. New York City is always in my heart, and frankly, it'll always be part of Clear Harbor. So I think it's not going away as much as some folks believe it could dissipate in its level of importance.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm familiar with the project. A buddy of mine is working on it there in Stamford, down by the waterfront. And, it's really keyed on this notion that there is a proximity that you want to New York City, but the proximity also to where your people are, and it's a burgeoning place. So interested to hear your
Absolutely.
perspective.
Yeah, there's a lot of great idea generation happening out here. As you know, some of the big hedge fund managers have been out here for a long time, and we're happy to be here, and we look forward to working from this location going forward.
Right, strategically positioned too in terms of kind of New York Metro, right? It's easy accessible if you have to come to the city or you have to travel. Like it's all here, but it does give you that flexibility.
This is a very specific thing, but like the fact that you're there by a major train station that not only has Metro North but Amtrak as well. All right, well, so there's your ad for Connecticut real estate in the greater Stamford area, brought to you by us. But Aaron, one of the things we're about to catch up in the next little bit with one of our top political analysts, and she's going to tell us about what's going on at the RNC this week. We had the DNC last week. We are at that point where smart investors really are starting to think about presidential politics. What's your read at this moment?
I think, there are a couple of schools of thought. One is 2 weeks ago, everyone said President Biden for sure. And now we're heading into, Vice President Biden will win. Now we're heading into this week, and polls are tightening. I think the national polls have always been sort of useless to look at. So you want to look at these key battleground state polls like Minnesota, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, which will be tough for President Trump because Biden does proclaim that he hails from the Scranton area. Florida's closer than anticipated. So those polls will be important, but the messaging will be important too. I think, real questions when push comes to shove around, how the leadership currently has dealt with the COVID crisis is going to weigh on voter sentiment. I think the question, too, about to what extent that sort of swing voter that leaned toward Trump in 2016 will continue leaning in that direction, or does Biden sort of represent that blue-collar, folksy, very sort of, in some sense, polar opposite of the Hillary Clinton personality approach, and are we more comfortable with him? One person once told me that, if you can envision yourself having a beer with the individual running for president at a pub for an hour, there's a good chance you'd vote for that person. And so, maybe people will subconsciously be asking themselves this question as they, just prior to entering the polls.
Well, that certainly seemed like part of what the Democrats were trying to portray last week in terms of how they were framing their candidate. Really good to catch up with you. Thanks for going with us down that rabbit hole into location and geography. It's a really important conversation that we're continuing to have. And we know that, from the feedback that we're getting, that a lot of our listeners are thinking about that as well. So it's clearly an important topic. Aaron Kennan, co-founder, chief executive officer of Clear Harbor Asset Management, joining us from his new headquarters in Stamford, Connecticut.
Listen, I think there's going to be a lot of surveying of various workforces, right? And saying, okay, guys, here's what we do, and if you've got the majority of workers who are like, I'm just not comfortable, this is where I am, then you got to figure out, okay, I got to make plans, right?
Yep.
As somebody who runs a company. So great to check in with him. All right, everybody, just, about 3.5 minutes left to go in today's trading session. So Jason and I, we're going to count you down to the closing bell. Got some movers and shakers coming your way.
We have all of that.
Movers and shakers. That would be a great necklace. Movers and shakers.
That's a lot. That's a lot.
3 necklaces.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. There you have it, sound of the closing bell at the New York Stock Exchange. As we wrap up trading on this Tuesday, August 25th, folks from Alarion ringing that closing bell. Both the S&P, NASDAQ notching new records. A down day for the Dow Jones Industrial Average, but closing well off session lows. So far this year, by the way, the Dow is now down by 1%. Your closing numbers: the S&P 500 index up another 12 points, up by 0.4%. NASDAQ up 86, higher by 0.8%, bringing its year-to-date gain to 27.8%. Again, the Dow down 59 points, a drop today of 0.2%. Stocks rising to records for a third day as investors counting on the Federal Reserve to stay accommodative as the economy recovers from the coronavirus pandemic. 10-year down 9/32 with a yield of 0.68%. Gold lower a little change, down 33 cents the ounce at $19.28. West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.7%, $43.35 a barrel. As for the market backdrop, Chris Verone is head of technical analysis at Strategas Research.
Under the surface, we continue to see signs that participation is actually getting broader here. And you see it with, just over the last month, the re-involvement of industrials, the improvement in discretionary. I mean, these are groups that have largely been relative laggards for the past 2.5 years that are starting to showcase some type of relative strength. That is welcome. I think it reflects a broadening of leadership, and that's certainly something I think most participants have been craving.
It is the biggest reshuffling for the Dow Jones Industrial Average in 7 years. 3 up, 3 down. ExxonMobil, Pfizer, Raytheon Technologies all kicked out, making way for Salesforce.com, Amgen, and Honeywell International to enter the 124-year-old equity gauge next year. As we await the numbers from Salesforce, up 3.6% today. Amgen up 5.4%. Honeywell up 3.2% on the minus side. ExxonMobil down 3.1%. Pfizer down 1.1%. And Raytheon down by 1.5%. Recapping, S&P at a record up 0.4. I'm Charlie Pellet. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Your next move will be your last.
Nobody move a muscle.
Damn, Shippy, you got some moves.
We're now moving on from town to town.
Time is money. Let's go. Come on, move it.
Shake it up. Shake it up.
Bloomberg Business Week. Movers and Shakers with Carol Masser and Jason Kelly on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, everybody, time to take a look at some of the stocks on the move. We're also watching for some earnings. HPE, Hewlett-Packard Enterprises coming out. Autodesk actually crossing as we speak. And Salesforce also coming out with their earnings. So going to be watching all of those. Let's just do big picture real quickly, though. S&P 500, because it was really kind of an even split day here. 240 names in the index higher today, 259 lower. 6 unchanged, Jason. But that's the kind of day it was, kind of up, down. Dow definitely under a lot more pressure than the rest of the market.
Yeah, it's interesting, and even looking at some specific names, and you mentioned some of those earnings we're anticipating. Nico Grant's going to be back with us today. We caught up with him yesterday about his great story about Silicon Valley. He's going to break down some of those earnings, tell us about some of the other things that are going on out there. I tell you, Northern California, what a mess in many ways, and some great stories we want to dig into on that. Speaking of the Bay Area, Gap, that is actually your biggest gainer, headquartered in San Francisco. That's why I say that. That's your biggest gainer, raised to buy at Citi on unrecognized value of the Athleta brand. Gap can unlock value in Old Navy and Athleta, according to an analyst. So that is your biggest gainer. I mean, this is coming at a moment, Carol, where Gap, which was up 10.4% today, they're closing their flagship store in San Francisco.
That's
so
amazing.
This is in many ways a bet on a recovery to some extent and a new business model, or at least a new focus going forward. This is a stock that, now, if I'm reading this right, is only down 3% this year.
Because I think people think something's going to happen, right? And it already is beginning to. They know that they've got to rework their brand. It's just not been working, and they've, bits and pieces that are stronger than others, like Athleta and some of those brands that kind of really feed into what our world is about, athleisure and so on and so forth. And so I think there's just expectations that that stuff is coming. We've really got to kind of explore that, I think, a little bit more on our air. Do want to mention Autodesk because it's down a bunch in the after hours, a few percentage point. It's bouncing around here. Let me just pull up the post here, and stock looks like it's down about 3% following their latest earnings. The company seeing fiscal year revenue 3.72 billion to 3.77. Bring that a little bit, so maybe a little bit of a disappointment. And that stock, let me just see what it's been doing. It's up about 38% this year, so maybe any little bit of disappointment. You can see why investors might be a little concerned.
Yeah, back to retail for a second. On the other side of the ledger, Best Buy, BBY, that is your worst performer in the S&P, warning that growth is slowing after a nice, strong quarter. Comparable store sales, they beat analyst estimates in the current period, but downbeat hints about the rest of the third quarter, sending the shares falling. That's according to our pal Matt Boyle, who was covering those earnings. You know, Best Buy is an interesting bellwether of sorts when it comes to, you know, how people spend money, how comfortable they are about going out and buying that new TV. Guessing they've gotten a little bit of a boost from some of the work at home, stay at home crowd. But we also know, and Rhea Thomas brought this up when we were talking to her, those unemployment benefits rolling off, that some of that discretionary income may not be available until and unless some of that benefit comes back in. And we don't know whether that's going to happen or when.
Yeah, exactly. So watching that, HPE is out with their earnings, and that stock is up about 2-3% here, 2 to 3%, in the after hours. Quick check on kind of the headlines off of that. Company seeing fiscal year adjusted EPS $1.30 to $1.34. That's significantly above the street estimates of $1.20. They also see fiscal year, well, let me just go through. Third quarter adjusted EPS, 32 cents. That was a big beat compared to the estimate of 23. Third quarter net revenue was also a big beat, 6.8 billion versus 6.08 billion. So that explains why you're seeing that stock pop in the after hours.
And we will get more about that and Salesforce when we catch up with Nico Grant. Let's take a quick look at volatility. The VIX down a touch, 1.6% or so, closing at 22.02. It's Bloomberg.
All right, Dave, you're up.
Hi, my name is Dave.
Wilson, where are you? Wilson!
Just what do you think you're doing, Dave?
We're going for a price on Wilson.
Open up the door, it's Dave! Who? Dave! Hey, Mr. Wilson!
Hey, Mr. Wilson. Dave Wilson back with us for your stock of the day. What you got?
American Woodmark, Jason. It's a maker of kitchen and bath cabinets sold under its own name as well as brand names like Shenandoah and Timberlake. The company sells to home builders and remodeling contractors. American Woodmark was founded in 1951. It was owned by paper company Boise Cascade before a buyout in 1980. The company went public in 1986. The ticker is AMWD. American Woodmark shares set a record in January 2018 and then proceeded to plunge as much as 76%. In March of this year, they traded at the lowest price since 2014. Now, since then, American Woodmark has surged as much as 170%, and that became before the release of fiscal first quarter results today. The figures showed smaller declines in earnings and sales than analysts expected based on Bloomberg survey. American Woodmark's outlook for the second quarter didn't go over so well. The company said on a conference call that higher labor costs and new product expenses will reduce profit margins. And in response, the shares fell as much as 14% and closed with a loss of 7.4%. That was the biggest for the stock in 2 months.
All right, Dave Wilson, thank you so much. A quick headline, Salesforce. The red head on the Bloomberg, fiscal year revenue $20.7 billion to $20.8 billion. The estimate is just above. The estimate had been for 20.0. Actually, sorry, it's more than a touch above. The estimate had been for 20.06 billion. So let's take a quick check.
Stock's up about 7.5% in the after hours.
There you go. So it's all about the forecast. We're going to get into that in just a few minutes. Our thanks to Dave Wilson as well. Let's send it out to San Francisco. Talking a lot about San Francisco today. Our pal Ed Baxter is there with headlines. Hey, Ed.
Hi, Jason. Hi, Carol. Responding to an outcry from medical experts, including the Mayo Clinic, FDA Commissioner Stephen Hahn is walking back and has apologized for his statement standing next to Donald Trump on the eve of the convention. He said the convalescent plasma therapy could save 35 out of 100 people with severe complications. This, an echo of the Trump statement, comes at a time when decisions are being made about how fast to get vaccines to market. He says, "I apologize. The tests are in preliminary stages, and even those don't show that kind of effect at all." Hurricane Laura just about ready to come on shore Houston and Louisiana coasts. Worries are wind and storm surge. Texas Governor is Greg Abbott.
This is going to be more of a wind event. There will be some very meaningful gusts of wind along the coastline coming inland.
They are predicting 72 to 110 miles per hour. Hundreds of thousands of people ordered to evacuate. Northern California wildfires continue to grow, but at a slower pace. Some evacuations have been lifted as a good news. The unhealthy air alerts remain in effect at least through tomorrow. Hong Kong is easing some social distancing measures as of the end of the week.
Starting Friday, we're talking about indoor dining, but of course, all with limitations, only 2 people per table. You can exercise outdoors without a mask, but when it comes to indoor activities, you still need to wear your mask.
Now, Bloomberg's Sherry On says the government feels its swift actions helped curb the spread. GOP convention, headliners Melania Trump, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who we're told will be speaking as a private citizen. In San Francisco, I'm Ed Baxter. This is Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Ed, thank you so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Jason Kelly and Carol Masser. I love The Rock. I'm going to say it.
What's not to love? Isn't he like the highest paid too, like performer, or tends to be like among when, is it Forbes or Fortune or somebody like does the top ranking entertainers, and he tends to be at the top of the list. Smart guy.
I mean, he is amazing to watch in many ways because he really has turned himself into one of these sort of multi-hyphenates in many ways. And part of what he has done, which is so smart, and this goes back to a number of conversations we've had over the past few months, is he takes stakes. Like he gets a piece of the, I was about to say a piece of the rock. That's not what I mean. But, he owns the Titan Games. He has started, because everybody has a blank check company, his partner, Danny Garcia, who is his former wife, I believe, they are making an investment in digital personal finance service, Acorns. They're going to give each new user a $7 credit. This is symbolic because The Rock has said that when he was cut from the Canadian Football League, he had $7 in his bank account.
I love this story. But this is this whole idea of, my mom always used to be pay yourself first, right? In terms of investing. And this whole idea that, a little bit of money invested early on and it becomes routine for you, it does grow into something. And I think he's tapping into that. And really, this is something I think we don't do so well as a society, of really teaching everyone how to invest and become part of the investment society. It's one thing if you're with a company that's got a 401k, but I think what he's doing is just great. We need to get him on. This would be a great interview.
The beauty of compound interest, the CEO of Acorns said that anyone who invested $7 a week starting when they were born would have more than $800,000 by the time they retire, assuming an 8% annual rate of return.
And I spent it on, I don't know what, yo-yos.
Sweet green. Half a sweet green.
This is so brilliant, but this is how you change. This is how you take a deliberate action and really make a change. This is Bloomberg.
Headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Lots of headlines involving Salesforce.com reporting earnings after the close. Shares up now by 10%. Second quarter revenue came in at $5.15 billion. Estimates were for $4.90 billion. Salesforce also forecast revenue for the full year that beat the highest analyst estimate, sees revenue in the range of $20.7 billion to $20.8 billion. Estimates were for $20.6 billion, also raising the third quarter outlook. Again, repeating, Salesforce shares surging after hours after earnings, up now by roughly 10%. It was a mixed day on Wall Street, but another day of records for both the S&P 500 index and the Dow Jones Industrial Average. Today we saw the Dow fall off session lows, but down 60 points, a drop of 0.2%. S&P up 12 to 3443, a gain of 0.4%. Nasdaq up 86, up by 0.8%. 10-year down 9/30 seconds with a yield of 0.68%. Gold lower, little change, down 49 cents the ounce at $19.28. West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.7%, 43.35 a barrel. Again, repeating a major beat out of Salesforce.com, based in San Francisco. Shares up now by roughly 10%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Jason Kelly, Carol Massar here with you on a Tuesday afternoon. It's day 2, soon to be night 2 of the Republican National Convention. I have to say, you and I are just sort of giddy about this every day because we're bouncing back and forth day to day. We're catching up with our 2 favorite strategists when it comes to politics. Yesterday, we caught up with Rick Davis. Today, back with us is Jeannie Zaino, political contributor for Bloomberg, professor of political science over at Iona College.
I wrote my notes. We're rubbing our hands together because we're heading back to poli-sci class.
Yeah, we're headed back to class.
Jeannie was so delighted.
And it's
I
Jeannie.
love it.
I know.
Sorry, I'm interrupting your introduction. I'm sorry. I'm excited to talk to you.
No, we're excited to talk to you as well. I mean, listen, it's an amazing time if you're interested in politics, in part because it is all so different. And usually there is a compare and contrast between the DNC and the RNC, depending on who goes first. Obviously, one sets the tone and the other, sort of does something a little bit different. But man, tonally, last night at least, pretty different from what we heard and saw last week, fair to say.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so good to talk to you guys. It's the most exciting time of the year, so it's like Christmas.
It is, it is.
Yeah, and it continues right through November. But no, it really was very different last night. I have to give the Republicans credit because, in a short period of time, very much like the Democrats, I am amazed that they were able to do at least their first day without much of a, technical glitch. So hard to do with all these moving parts. And I think they did strike the tone, and I'm not saying in terms of the content, but in terms of the look of it, moving from Charlottesville to D.C. So I give them credit for that. But I think, what stood out to me was there was, depending on what parts of it you watched, unless you watched the whole thing, you sort of had whiplash. Because on the one hand, there was this very dark vision of what the world will be like if we go with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and we're going to be living in, a communist socialist state. They're going to be trying to take away our guns and our churches. And you heard, Kimberly Guilfoyle and Donald Trump Jr. and Charlie Kirk and the McCloskeys. I mean, it was all very dark. And then it was like whiplash, because then all of a sudden you had, and we're going to respond to the charges they've leveled against us. Donald Trump is not such a bad guy. Look, here he is talking to ordinary Americans. And, we are not racist. Here is the diversity in the party. And so it was sort of a whiplash depending on which parts you watched and paid attention to.
Go ahead, Jace. You have got to follow there.
I've got a million different questions. But there definitely was a tonal shift. And talk to us specifically about Tim Scott from South Carolina, because you had 2 actually very prominent South Carolinians, and we could talk about Nikki Haley separately. But Tim Scott was I think, a fascinating representative of the party in many ways.
Absolutely. And I would say that for many people, I know myself included, he gave the speech of the night. And I think to an American public that may not be quite as familiar with him as South Carolinians are, he introduced himself, and what an amazing story he has. And he not only defended the Republican Party and Donald Trump, but he told us a lot about his biography, the fact that he is not only just the only African-American Republican in the Senate, but this amazing story. I mean, I was laughing when he said he failed civics and he came back to become senator of the United States. A really, really smart, charming guy. And he made the case that, despite, essentially what I think Nikki Haley did as well, saying despite what you may hear and think about Donald Trump, in fact, if you get beyond the rhetoric and don't think about what you've heard, but look at what he's done some things and a lot of things, and he listed a litany of them that are very good for the African-American community. And he went through that list, and it was quite remarkable. Everything from employment to issues involving these empowerment zones and the tax bill. So a whole host of things, and he said, this is why I'm a Republican and why I'm choosing Trump over Biden.
Is he right?
There are things that Donald Trump has done and that the party has done. And, it was interesting because we got a chance to talk before that to Frank Keating, the former governor of Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. And he was talking, obviously we all know this, but reminding us, Republicans are the party that fought to end slavery. We were not the party of segregation. That was the Democrats. I mean, he talked a lot about the history. He talked about these, the work that people like Jack Kemp has done. And I think And I think that, that Keating sort of Tim Scott, even Nikki Haley is another side to the Republican Party we don't hear about as much, we don't talk about as much today, but it's still very much there and alive in the history of the party. And I think they did a good job bringing that to the forefront yesterday.
I think it's a reminder, too, that just like there's a spectrum, as we saw last week with the Democratic Party, right? Yeah. It's the same thing with the Republican Party, and that is certainly being played out in the speakers. We're going to do a little bit of news, but then we're going to come back with Bloomberg News political contributor and Iona College professor of political science, Jeannie Zaino, joining us on the phone from Westchester. It really is a segment we love, just getting to
School's in session, and we love it. We love it. We love Jeannie and all of her insights. I do want to ask her a little bit about Nikki Haley.
Yeah.
And then we're going to get a preview of night two. We're going to see more of the president. We're going to see a couple more presidential children. We're going to see the wife of the president, the first lady, and much more. For those of you listening in New York and San Francisco, watching on YouTube, Bloomberg Business Week continues right here with Jeannie Zaino and more. If you're listening on 99.1 in D.C., sound on Kevin Cirilli, that is coming up next. Stick with us. We have a lot more to do on this Tuesday afternoon. This is Bloomberg.
Broadcasting live to New York, Bloomberg 1130. To Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 99.1. To Boston, Bloomberg 106.1. To San Francisco, Bloomberg 960. To the country, Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
We're still in class, Jason Kelly.
I know. We just
Maybe we take it
stepped
outside now.
Yeah, I got a little bit of a, got a pass to, use the restroom, come back, wash my hands, all ready to go.
What are you in high school? Grade school?
Yeah, that's what I mean.
College, you didn't need a pass.
Oh, you don't?
just
You
left.
just walk out? Oh.
Yeah.
You went to it.
You never walked out on a class though with Jeannie Zano, so we're going to get back
Absolutely.
to her.
You missed something.
Yeah, totally. Over at Iona College, we're talking about the RNC. So first up, though, let's check in once again with Charlie Pellet, see what he's focusing on.
All right, lots of headlines after the closing bell. That's what we focus on. That's what we do here at Bloomberg's. Germany is extending its wage support program through the end of 2021. More trouble in the cruise industry. Princess canceling a pair of cruises in early 2021. Earlier today, Cunard said it would not set sail again until next year. After the bell, seeing a surge in Salesforce shares up by roughly 11%. Second quarter revenue of $5.15 billion. Estimates were for $4.90 billion. Also after the bell, we heard from HP Enterprise. It forecast adjusted earnings per share for the full year, with the guidance beating the average analyst estimate. Shares up now by roughly 5%. It's the biggest reshuffling for the Dow Jones Industrial Average in 7 years. ExxonMobil, Pfizer, and Raytheon kicked out, making way for Salesforce, Amgen, and Honeywell International to enter the 124-year-old equity gauge next week. Regina Mayer is Global Head of Energy at KPMG.
It does mark a shift in the era of where capital wants to go and what investors are going to look at. The tech stocks are clearly on a boom. I wish I had made some different choices, early in the pandemic. But it does indicate that the large industrial, the behemoths of our time are probably not where capital wants to flow.
She's very much focused on energy shares like ExxonMobil, down today by 3.2%. Pfizer was down 1.1%, and Raytheon Technologies lower by 1.5%. But on the plus side, after earnings, Salesforce going into the Dow reported earnings after the bell, up today by 3.6%. Shares higher after hours now by roughly 11%. Amgen rallied 5.4% today. Honeywell International up by 3.2%. Mixed day for U.S. equities here. We had the Dow lower by 60 points, down 0.2%, but the S&P, NASDAQ, both at records. S&P up 12, up 0.4%. NASDAQ up 86, higher by 0.8%. 10-year down 9/32. The yield there 0.68%. Gold, little change, down 77 cents the ounce at $19.28. West Texas Intermediate up by 1.7% at $43.35 a barrel. Class continues. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It does indeed, and this is one where you don't get bored, that's for sure. Bloomberg News political contributor and Iona College professor of political science, Jeannie Zano, still with us from Westchester. We're talking about the RNC this week. It's day 2 that gets underway this evening. Before we get to that, I have one last question for you, Jeannie, and it was something I was listening to on David Weston's show earlier on politics and, of course, on the RNC, but it has to do with some of those promises that Donald Trump, then candidate Donald Trump, made to the voters, and that was draining the swamp. And if I look at, like, PolitiFact has some stats out, and they say recent administrations with the most criminal indictments, 215 during Donald Trump's administration. A lot more, certainly, than we've seen in past Republican administrations, even the Nixon administration, and a lot more than we've seen under Democratic presidents. Do things like this matter?
It's such a great point because, of course, they do matter and they should matter. And this is where I think the Trump campaign and Donald Trump himself is struggling a good deal, which is that he is much more comfortable running as a challenger, running against the establishment, blaming other people for what they've done wrong. And, of course, as you are president, you now are 3.5 years into this. You own all of this. So even one of the most recent issues involving Steve Bannon, he can rightly say Steve Bannon left the White House 2-3 years ago. I had nothing to do with that, which apparently is true. But yet he still owns that. And so I do think he has, indicated that the job, we heard Mike Pence say this at least, that the job of draining the swamp is not over, it continues. But people also voters also rightly say, you've had 3.5 years to do that, and your campaign from 2016, let alone your administration, has been one of the most, litigated in terms of people being charged with offenses and those kinds of things that we've seen in modern history. So how do you explain that? And the president should explain that. And, for me personally, I don't think he has done that adequately yet.
All right. So what are you listening and watching for tonight, Jeannie?
Well, tonight we're going to hear, of course, from the First Lady, who is going to be speaking from the Rose Garden, we understand. And also you have some people like Rand Paul, the senator from Kentucky, and, a few other sort of quote-unquote regular people like Nicholas Sandman, the teenager.
Right.
But, I think when you think about Melania Trump and then, of course, the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, I think it is really worth noting that she is speaking from the White House, the Rose Garden, and he presumably is going to be speaking either on tape or live. I assume it's taped from Jerusalem. Yeah. And for many people, those are, potential violations, too much conflation of governing and campaigning. And of course, the State Department is saying he's doing this as a private citizen, but it makes many people uncomfortable to have the Secretary of State overseas making a political statement on foreign land. And of course, same thing, Melania Trump, and then we assume on Thursday the president using the White House to accept the nomination. So I do think another sort of strange twist here, the president speaking every day and these high-level officials speaking from, in the context of their public, elected roles, and not sort of differentiating between campaigning and governing, which makes many people uncomfortable, and people are even talking about violations of the Hatch Act.
Right. I also think it's just even Melania Trump. I think some people, in the Rose Garden, that's just been redone, and I know it was done with private money, but nonetheless, it feels a little tone deaf.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have heard people say that, and I think that she, I'm curious to see. I don't know what she will say. I'm curious to see if she does address that. And of course, in 2016, when she made her statement at the convention, and then she, of course, was accused of using words that were first spoken by Michelle Obama. So, that is another thing that I don't want to say she's going to have to answer to, but that people, I think, are going to be watching out for. There's, evidence of plagiarism again.
Right, exactly. All right, well, we will be tuning in. We know you will be, too. We're so excited to get so many chances to talk to you over these very important couple of weeks. Jeannie Zaino is a political contributor to Bloomberg, also a professor of political science at Iona College. Carol, you and I would not be passing notes during this class.
No, totally.
We'd be passing like nerdy notes, like, remember, this reminds me of this thing that this happened.
We'd be down in front, and we would be really annoying.
And we'd be like trying to elbow each other out to like say the smart thing to Professor Zaino. It's like, and when she said good question, we'd look at the other person like, that was a good question.
Which we do on air.
Which we do already.
Which you guys all can't see, but we do that.
We do, exactly.
Great stuff. I'm looking forward to finishing out the week with her as well. All right, let's get back to World and National News headlines. Back on over to Ed Baxter in San Francisco. Hey, Ed.
Hey there. I love another Jason and Carol T-shirt. Spread smartness.
Aw.
I like it. Wisconsin Governor Tony Evers has declared a state of emergency after businesses were vandalized and dozens of buildings set on fire. This in the wake of the shooting of a black man being shot multiple times in the back. He says a cycle of systemic racism and injustice cannot be tolerated, but also neither can this path of damage and destruction. GOP convention tonight, Melania Trump, Mike Pompeo, Rudy Giuliani out front saying that the Trump economic plans have been very good for people of color.
Highest number of jobs for African Americans, the highest wages, the lowest unemployment for African Americans and Hispanics. So the whole idea that his economic reforms would just help the wealthy turned out to not be true.
He also said people who don't approve of Donald Trump just don't like his personality and has nothing to do with policy. Meanwhile, after talking with the RNC chair, Bloomberg's Kevin Cirilli says under the Hatch Act, Mike Pompeo can make a supportive speech as a private citizen.
She also noted that because it is virtual, that typically you would have people speak at a convention and all that would have been acquired and handled. But because it's virtual, he's having to do it on the road.
TV ratings, by the way, for the first night tumbled on every network compared to the Democrats last week, with the exception of Fox. Hundreds of thousands of people are being evacuated from the Gulf Coast as Hurricane Laura approaches.
This is going to be a storm that you have to worry about the wind as well as the storm surge. So we're looking at anywhere from, say, 74 to 110 mile per hour winds, potentially around Houston, just east of Lake Charles. That does include Lafayette. More than 110 mile per hour winds for places.
In San Francisco, I'm Ed Baxter. This is Bloomberg.
All right, Ed, thank you so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. This is a story, I feel like we actually haven't talked about it as much today as we have over the previous few days, and I'm guessing we will continue to talk about it a lot. Back to school. It is happening to some extent. We did talk a little bit about it with the president of the American Medical Association, but front of mind for you and for me with school-age kids, we're getting correspondence, as I'm guessing you are every day, from the school district. We're hearing things from the mayor of New York City. We talked about this yesterday, potentially having class outside, which we always joke about, but this is something that could be happening. But it is really something that people with pre-existing conditions, people with underlying health issues think about in a radically different way. And this story by Kristen Brown that's on the Bloomberg, it's one of the most read and really compelling and really worrying in a lot of ways, Carol.
Right. And it's not like, in some instances, it's about a kid who has something that they need to be worried about, right? That has underlying conditions. But, this story really getting into, teachers who have underlying conditions or parents who have underlying conditions. So do you send your kids to school? I mean, it's really, really complicated. And you've got to figure out, especially if you look at the early signs of how it's not gone well,
right?
It's got to make you a little nervous.
Yeah, and there's so many questions about sort of, what's lost by not being in class? What is the risk that you are willing to take? How does it affect your education? How does it affect you socially? From a mental health perspective,
especially younger kids,
balancing all of that with, your own health, but also the health of the people that you're around.
And I think what people are feeling is like they're kind of on their own, that they are reaching out to schools, but they've really got to kind of figure this out on their own. They're not necessarily getting much of an assist, unfortunately, in a lot of cases. So, yeah, this is a very, very tough situation. We'll put this out on Twitter.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Lots of after-the-bell earnings news. Hewlett-Packard Enterprise gave an outlook for earnings that was better than Wall Street was projecting, signaling that the server maker's extensive cost cuts are paying off. Shares up now by 5%. Salesforce.com topped analysts' second quarter revenue and profit estimates, also raised its annual sales forecast. Shares are now up more than 11% in extended trading. Also after the bell, we heard from Nordstrom. It did say it generated positive operating cash flow in the second quarter, but that did not ease the sting of a deep coronavirus-induced drop in sales. Shares falling in late trading. They're down now by roughly 6%. Mixed day, but nonetheless a day of records on Wall Street today, with the S&P 500 index up 12 points, up 0.4%. The Dow down 60, a drop of 0.2%. NASDAQ up 86 points, up 0.8%. Again, records for both the S&P and NASDAQ. 10-year down 10/32 with a yield of 0.68%. Gold now down 0.1%, lower by $2 the ounce at $19.26. And West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.8%, $43.41 a barrel. I'm Charlie Pellet. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Jason Kelly, Carol Masser. And you know what happens when you come on this show and you do an awesome job, Carol?
You come back.
You come back really, really soon. It also happens when you have your name on the most important stories of the week, and it's a busy earnings week, and products are failing, and people are buying other companies. I don't know how he's keeping it all together and producing so much, but he is. Nico Grant is enterprise technology reporter for Bloomberg. He joins us on the phone from Northern California. All right, Nico, great to have you back with us. It's an even busier day than it was yesterday. What are the highlights? What do we need to know about the earnings that we've seen from HPE and from CRM?
Thank you. So today, HPE rebounded quite a bit, which is why it had a bounce in extended trading. We had expected that the company would continue to struggle to offload some of its data center hardware, things like servers and these big boxes to store information. And in fact, it was better than expected. The company did about $6.8 billion, and the CEO just told me on the phone that it's because demand has stabilized from the depths of the pandemic a few months ago, and he's really seen a lot of interest in these storage hardware pieces that are good for AI applications and good for big data applications.
I mean,
and
Nico,
then with Salesforce.
Oh, no,
yeah,
go ahead. No. Finish. Go ahead, please.
And then with Salesforce, which has really emerged as the cloud bellwether, we've just seen beats across the board. The company has very much shrugged off the pandemic, which had earlier caused the company 3 months ago to reduce its earnings and revenue view for the rest of the year. I think that what you're seeing is that some corporate customers have decided that this is the new normal, and I'm going to have to buy servers. I'm going to have to upgrade my software after being more cautious a few months ago.
Which is just a reminder that, here's the world we're living in, and how do we expect it to go on longer, right? So what do we need to do, and the impact it's having on companies like a Salesforce?
Absolutely, and Salesforce has really tried to lean into some of the challenges right now. They've developed this portfolio of applications called Work.com that's all about how businesses can safely reopen if they are reopening offices, internationally, even if not in the U.S. right now, where the pandemic is a bit worse. And so that company is definitely doing that. I also looked at some of the metrics for cost of sales. The company's spending a lot more money on marketing and on other efforts to try to boost sales growth, and it was quite effective for companies that need to figure out business intelligence, companies that need to integrate different systems, and of course track customers, the bread and butter.
So Salesforce going into the Dow, how big a deal is that, Nico? Feels big.
It's a huge deal. It actually surprised me yesterday that Salesforce will be one of only 30 companies in the Dow Jones Industrial Index. And it is such a reminder of how over the last 21 years, the company has gone from being this technology upstart to being, again, the bellwether of cloud applications. Everything that you use for work, when you log in and you're sort of taken through the portal and it's some application for HR, for sales, for workflow, and trying to organize that. Salesforce is the largest company of this kind that's doing this work, absent Microsoft, which is more diversified. And so it's just really remarkable what it's done in this time.
All right. Meanwhile,
since we have you,
Salesforce had a great day yesterday, getting added to the Dow, and obviously another good day today. Zoom did not have a great day yesterday. Tell us about what happened there, and notably what the company's response was.
Right. So Zoom had this crash that prevented students and businesses from logging in to webinars and other virtual meetings, as well as just disrupting some of them that may have already been in progress. In particular, on the East Coast of the U.S. and Europe. Now, this was problematic because it was a day when many students were going back to school for the first time for the fall semester. The company said, particularly its CEO, Eric Yuan, that he was deeply sorry that this had happened. He understands the responsibility that people are now entrusting him with, and he's going to work to make sure it doesn't happen again. But it's such a reminder of how Americans and others around the world are entrusting so much on the shoulders of a company that they hadn't heard of just 8 months ago.
Yeah, I feel like how it's become, ubiquitous kind of in our world. Nico, you know what's interesting too about Eric Yuan? Because Jason and I talked with him too, kind of earlier in the shutdown, and especially as everybody was logging into Zoom and using their platform. He seems to be someone as an executive who's like, yeah, I messed up. Like we had a problem and we're working on it. Like
the security problem, because that was the other sort of big crisis they had, a bigger crisis in some ways than what happened yesterday.
But it's just refreshing. Like you don't always see, the head of a company come out and say, yeah, we had a problem. We're really sorry about it and we're working on it and we're going to fix it. And they do.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's because Eric Yuan's a very untraditional leader in that he's an engineer first and foremost. Yeah. And, he came to the U.S. And so much of the time he's just going to sort of say the truth as he sees it. And he has personally taken on, I know from previous reporting, just the, sort of emotional and psychological burden of having as many as 300 million daily participants use this service.
Yeah, exactly.
Just get your head around that. That is unbelievable.
Well, we know you have a lot to do, and we really appreciate you making some time for us again today. Nico Grant, our pal, out on the West Coast, looking after HP and CRM earnings, as well as keeping track of Zoom failure fallout, as well as some M&A that we didn't even get a chance to talk about. And also, if you missed it, check out the story that he wrote yesterday about black venture capitalists in Silicon Valley and the systemic racism. And it's a really nuanced and important story, Carol. It was one of those that I was thinking about not only after I read it, but certainly after talking to Nico about it. It really stuck with me in terms of